Aquarius. There are feelings that don't begin with clear words, not a special moment, not a promise that makes you believe right away. It's just something very subtle, quietly finding its way into your life, like being in the middle of an ordinary day and suddenly realizing there's someone who lingers in your thoughts a little longer than before. You can't quite name it. You don't rush to understand it either. You just feel something inside you is shifting, and strangely, the more silent it becomes, the clearer it feels. The less you say, the deeper it goes. Maybe this isn't the kind of love you once knew. Maybe it's something else entirely, a kind of connection that comes into your life just to touch you in a very different way. So if you've ever felt something that even you couldn't fully explain, then maybe this story will reach you in its own quiet way. There are connections that don't pass through the doorway of a confession. No official moment to begin. No one standing there saying something clear enough for you to simply nod and accept. It's more like something very light, so light you don't even notice it when it first arrives. Just an ordinary afternoon, a day unfolding like any other. You go through familiar routines, say familiar things, and then, at the end of the day, as everything begins to quiet down, you find yourself thinking about someone, not for any specific reason, not because they did anything special. It's just that they appear in your mind so naturally, and somehow they stay there longer than you expected. Maybe in that moment, you can't quite name what you're feeling. You don't rush to define it. You don't try to force a conclusion. You just sense something inside you is gently shifting. For Aquarius, feelings don't always arrive in predictable ways. You're used to observing the world from just enough distance. You understand people, you understand situations, but you don't often let yourself be carried away by emotion right away. So, when this happens, it doesn't overwhelm you. It doesn't rush in all at once. It feels more like a soft wave, moving outward from within, slow but steady. You keep living your life. You still smile, still work, still move forward with your own plans. And yet, somewhere inside, a small space begins to form. A space that quietly holds someone. No one asks you to name it. No one pushes you to understand it right away. And maybe that's exactly why this feeling has room to grow. Like the light at the end of the day, not too bright, not too sharp. Just enough to soften everything it touches. A kind of light that makes you notice. Even the most familiar things feel slightly different. You don't need to change anything right away. You don't need to chase an answer. It's just that, from that moment on, you begin to see the world with a softer gaze. You hear things more slowly. You feel things more deeply, that you might have once overlooked. Maybe this isn't love the way you've known it before. Maybe it's not even a story with a clear beginning. But sometimes, it's the things that aren't clearly defined that carry the deepest kind of meaning. And if you've ever had a moment like that, a feeling that arrived without needing an explanation, then maybe this journey started for you long before you realized it. Then there comes a season when everything feels a little more blurred. You're no longer standing at the beginning, but you haven't fully stepped into anything clear either. It's just that you begin to notice you're changing. You pay more attention. Small things that once meant very little now stay with you longer. A sentence, a look, a very ordinary moment. And somehow it makes you think a little more, feel a little deeper, and you start asking yourself, what is this? It's not exactly a simple crush, but it still doesn't feel clear enough to call love. It lives somewhere in between, a space that's hard to define, and yet very real. And the thing that makes you realize it most is that person's presence. They don't have to say much. They don't have to do anything extraordinary. Just having them there seems to slow everything down inside you. Softer, lighter, more at ease. As if you don't have to try to become someone else. As if you don't have to explain so much about who you are. You can simply be yourself, naturally. For some people, feelings arrive fast, clear, easy to recognize. But for Aquarius, things often unfold differently. You don't rush, you observe, you feel before you believe. And maybe that's why, when the feeling truly begins to appear. It doesn't arrive with instant certainty. It arrives with questions. Why do I keep thinking about this person so much? Why does one small detail stay in my mind for so long? And why do I feel so calm when they're near? You're not avoiding your feelings, but you're not quick to name them either, because part of you wants to understand before you accept. And yet, there are some things. The more you try to understand them, the less they can be fully explained. And maybe the hardest part isn't loving someone. Maybe the hardest part is the moment you begin to realize you are truly opening your heart, not in a dramatic way, not through bold declarations, but through a very quiet shift within. A door you once kept closed, slowly, gently beginning to open. Aquarius is used to moving through life with reason. You analyze, you understand, you look at things from more than one angle, but this time, your heart moves first, and your mind, it doesn't disappear, it simply steps back a little, as if it too is listening, waiting to see what happens next. And then you begin to realize there are feelings that once you try to put them into words, no longer remain exactly as they were in the beginning. Not because they've grown weaker, but because words aren't always wide enough to hold everything you feel, so you don't rush to speak. Not because you're hiding, not because you're afraid. It's just that you want to keep that feeling in a quieter place, a place where it doesn't get defined too soon. You start to observe more, not just the other person, but the way you respond when they appear, a glance that makes you pause, a sentence that lingers in your mind longer than usual, a silence between the two of you that somehow feels strangely comfortable. You stay close, but you always keep just enough distance. Not to avoid, but to give the feeling space to grow on its own, without pressure, without being named too quickly. And in that stillness, you begin to understand something, very gently. Not every feeling needs to be spoken right away. Not every connection needs to be confirmed with words. Some things, the more you let them be, the clearer they become. You stop chasing answers. You stop trying to find the exact name for what you're going through. You simply feel. You feel the way your heart responds. You feel how time moves when that person is around. You feel the smallest shifts, quiet, but undeniably real. For Aquarius, this can feel unfamiliar. You've been used to understanding things through logic, used to needing a reason for every emotion. But this time, nothing arrives with a clear explanation. It just comes and stays. No need to prove it, no need to confirm it, no need to rush forward. And in that space, something begins to deepen, not because you force it to grow, but because you've given it enough room to become what it truly is, naturally, honestly. And maybe, at some point, you'll come to realize the things you never said were the very things that touched your heart the deepest. And then, there comes a moment when things begin to change, in a way that's hard to notice right away. There's no clear point you can call the end. No long conversation to say everything that needed to be said. No final period strong enough to make you stop and realize everything is different now. It's just the messages become less frequent, their presence a little more rare, the silences lasting just a bit longer than before. You don't rush to ask questions. You don't try to hold on, because somewhere deep inside, you can feel it. Something is quietly coming to a close in the most natural way, like the end of a day. No one needs to announce it. The light simply fades, and the darkness gently takes its place. Maybe before, you would have needed to understand it all. You would have wanted a reason, a clear explanation, something to hold on to as it slipped away. But this time, you choose differently. You don't chase after answers. You don't try to piece together what's missing. You don't force this into a complete story. You simply stay, watching things drift apart, listening to yourself in the quiet that follows. And what's strange is, you don't feel the pain the way you thought you would. It's not that you feel nothing. It's not that it never mattered. It's just that you begin to realize that this feeling doesn't carry the kind of loss you expected. It carries a kind of stillness, a soft emptiness, but not a heavy one. Like stepping out of a room you've stayed in long enough, no longer belonging there, but not needing to regret it either. And in that quiet lightness, you begin to understand something. Not every connection is meant to last forever. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. Some people are only meant to walk beside you for a while, not to build a lifelong future, but to touch something within you, a part of yourself you may have never known before. Maybe they didn't bring a perfect ending, but they brought a real experience, one that helped you feel deeper, slow down, and see yourself more clearly from within. For Aquarius, this isn't always easy. You're used to searching for meaning in everything. If you want reasons, you want structure, you want things to make sense. But this time, you learn something different. You learn to accept what isn't complete, not by letting go completely, but by allowing it to remain in your memory as something that was once very real. You don't need to go back. You don't need to deny it. You only need to understand it has already fulfilled its place in your journey. And maybe what matters most isn't how long a connection lasts, but how it changes you, what it opens within you, where it helps you feel more deeply, which version of yourself it allows you to meet. Because sometimes an ending isn't there to close everything, but to create space where something new, something deeper can begin to form very quietly. After everything you've been through, the way you see love begins to change, quietly. Not all at once. There isn't a moment where you stop and say, I'm different now. It's more like a very subtle shift, an old perspective gently closing, and a new way of feeling slowly opening. You don't think about love the same way anymore. You don't place it inside familiar definitions, that you have to have someone, hold on to them, or walk together toward a clearly defined ending. Those ideas aren't wrong. It's just that you begin to see love can exist in more ways than you once believed. There are connections that don't need to last forever to be meaningful. There are feelings that don't need to be fully named, and yet they're deep enough to change you from within. And there are people who don't stay, but still leave behind something very real inside you. And you begin to appreciate that. Not by holding on to the past, but by accepting that some things come into your life simply so you can feel. To feel a kind of softness within yourself, a part of you you may not have noticed before. You slow down, just a little. Not because you've lost direction, but because you've started listening more closely. Listening to your emotions, listening to the quiet moments, even listening to things that can't quite be put into words. And in that process, you turn inward more often. Not to search for immediate answers, but to understand what you're truly feeling. For Aquarius, this can be a meaningful shift. You've been used to observing the world from the outside, analyzing, connecting the pieces, understanding people, understanding situations, but now you begin to look inward the same way. You question your own emotions. You listen to your heart's response. You notice things you may have once overlooked, not to control them, but to understand them. And then you begin to realize love isn't only a story between two people. It's also a journey where you learn to understand yourself more deeply. Maybe you still don't have a clear definition. Maybe you still can't say exactly what love is. But, you've touched something real, something that doesn't need to be proven, doesn't need to be explained. And yet, it stays with you as a quiet part of your growth. And maybe this is how love teaches you in its own gentle way. Not how to hold on to someone, but how to become more honest with yourself. And then there comes a very quiet moment when you realize you're no longer the same as before. Not because something dramatic happened, and not because of a turning point you can clearly point to. It's just that in the way you feel, in the way you see things, something has quietly shifted. You don't search for answers the way you used to. You don't rush to label your emotions. You don't feel the need to understand everything right away. You begin to accept what isn't complete. You accept the silences. You accept what cannot be named. And in that acceptance, you feel lighter. A door has closed, without noise, without needing to hold on, without carrying too much regret. It closes, the way a chapter in life naturally comes to an end. No clear reason needed. Just, it's time. But what matters isn't the door that closed. It's what remains within you. You begin to realize some experiences don't come to help you keep someone. They come to open a new version of yourself. A version that knows how to love more deeply. Not deeper in a complicated way, but in a more honest one. You start to notice the smallest emotions, things that once passed by, now stay with you a little longer. You begin to appreciate connections, even when they don't last. You no longer see things as simply having or losing, but rather, what did this touch inside me? For Aquarius, this is a quiet shift, but a profound one. You are still you, still thoughtful, still observant, still able to keep your distance when needed, but within you, there is now another layer of feeling you rarely showed before. A softness, a deeper sense of empathy, a way of feeling without needing to explain. And maybe the most beautiful part is this. You don't feel the need to rush into something new. You don't need to find another story to fill the space. You can stay with yourself for a while. Stay with what you've learned. Stay with the quiet sense that you've truly grown. Maybe you haven't said, I love you. And maybe you don't need to, because sometimes a long enough glance, a calm enough presence, or a silence deep enough already carries the meaning of love in a way that feels complete. No need to prove it, no need to define it, just to feel it, and that is enough.